If you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome back to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Richard Matthews, and I'm super excited to talk with Richard today because he's on the road and traveling, and he has been now for 4 years. So welcome to the show, Richard.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Richard, there's people around the world who haven't yet met you and your RV. So would you mind giving a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So my name is Richard Matthews. I'm the founder of Pushbutton Podcasts, which is a white glove agency, a full service agency for podcasters, for small businesses who want to use and leverage the multimedia world of podcasting to help drive awareness, attention, and authority for their business and drive leads and sales. So anyways, we handle everything for a business in the podcasting realm. After they hit that stop record button, we do all the work for them. So that's what we do with Pushbutton Podcasts. And I run that business from a 40-foot bus, a Class A RV with my wife and 4 kids and a dog. And we've been traveling the world for like I said, 4 years now, and I have a dispersed team. So we got a lot of experience running our organization with, we were doing remote work before it was cool, after the COVID crisis.
Yeah, sounds good. And Richard, one of the first things you mentioned was about building systems, and that is one of my favorite things to talk about as well. So I think we should touch on that a little bit. So what's been your experience so far with building systems, and what's sort of your mindset around it?
Yeah, so I have a podcast I have called The Hero Show, and my we talk to entrepreneurs about whether through their stories if they're a comic book superhero. So my superhero, I don't know what you call it, my superhero avatar on that show is the Alchemist, and I always tell people my superpower is seeing the systems behind things. Right, because that's the way that I look at and see the world. Is I see the systems that are the way people do stuff. Everything, and it's been a really helpful skill. I can pick up skills quickly because of that. So I learned to draw in a couple of weeks, or learned to play the piano and read music faster than my wife thought was possible. Because I just see systems where most people see steps and actions and whatnot. I see the systems behind things, which has been a useful skill set to have. And what that sort of led me to in my business was doing a lot of business or of systems building for my own business. And then realizing that when other business owners saw how we did things, they also wanted to learn my method for building systems. So I've actually got a course now called Pushbutton Process that teaches my methodology for how to build business systems. And I have a couple of basic rules for systems building that I follow. The first one, and the most important that everything else sort of leans on, is the idea that systems have they need to be blended between human beings, like your human capital, and your robot capital, right, or your automation ability. And where most people get that wrong is they don't know where the dividing line is between what should be automated and what should be handled by human beings. And so my number one rule is creativity is the realm of human capital, and everything else can be automated. Right. And so that's where we look at building our systems. That's sort of my first rule. I got a bunch of other stuff that sort of follows along that, but that's my core principle for looking at and building systems, is where you divide the line between human capital and robot capital.
Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think that it's a good way to look at it, right? I think a lot of the time when I see people trying to do so and build systems, they make it often too complex, right? And they make it they're so good at finding reasons for why it won't work and why you can't put a system around it, instead of just doing it, right? And I think a lot of the time, exactly as you said, I mean, there is ways to automate most things, right? There's definitely some creative aspect. There's definitely some aspect that are sometimes not automatable, but in general, particularly with systems, right? I mean, nowadays there's so much opportunity, not just to put them into a process, but also actually automate things to make it happen without having to have people pushing the buttons, right? So
and so the way I approach systems design now is I have a language framework that I use that I teach people, and it's essentially, it follows, there's four primary words that people use interchangeably that, if you actually look up the definitions, aren't terribly interchangeable. And so it's systems, workflow, process, and steps. And your systems are the overarching like goals for a business. And your systems are generally broken down into specific workflows. And then each workflow has the processes that happen inside of it. And then each process has the steps that go into it. So it's hierarchical. So as an example, in our podcasting business, we have a podcast. You might have a podcasting system in your business, right? And the goal of the podcasting system can be kind of ethereal, right? It's to increase awareness, or it's to increase the attention in your space, or to create preeminence, right? Your systems aren't generally specifically measurable. But then you take the next level down when you get into your workflows are what make up the system, right? So if podcasting is your system, then your workflows you might have a guest booking workflow, and that has a very specific measurable outcome, right? Where it's like, I need to go from, I don't have a guest on my show, to I have a guest who's booked in on the calendar and ready to show up, right? And then you might have a workflow for recording your podcast. And that has a very specific measurable result, where at the end of the workflow, you should have a recorded episode. And then you have the post-production workflow. And again, that has a very specific measurable outcome. So when people use the language that way, then it really helps in the designing the system, right? And then each workflow is going to have the processes that make it up. So if you had post-production, you might have the process for editing the video, and the process for editing the audio, and the process for creating the graphic assets, and the process for creating the written assets, right? And so the processes make up the workflow, which give you the defined outcome. And then each process, of course, has the step-by-step, right? So if you're editing audio, step 1 is, download the audio file. And step 2 is cut out all the ums and ahs. And step 3 is, whatever the steps are. And I find that when you have a really solid language foundation for how a system is designed, it's easier to like hold it in your head, because you have the right words and you know what you're actually going to build. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think I like the way you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, but that's good, Richard. And when did you start building systems in your business? Like, was it a day one thing, or like at what point did you like realize we need some systems?
So it was, I have been building templates and systems and other things since day one, since I started, but it wasn't with the awareness that that's what I was doing, right? And it wasn't with the awareness that I was just doing things that I thought made sense, and later realized what I was doing was building systems. And because that lack of awareness, my early business career and my early systems were sort of haphazard and messy. And as I've gotten to be a more experienced entrepreneur and more experienced with building systems and having my own language framework to use and understand things, a lot of that has gotten a lot more refined. And it really took a huge jump when I started hiring team members and started having systems that I wasn't just responsible for by myself. Because if it's all responsible if it's just you, it's really easy to have a messy system. Because it's all in your head, and if it's something that doesn't work the way that you want it to, you can just overcome it and keep going and not even really miss a beat. But as soon as you add other people into your business and you have to have processes followed the way that you want them followed, you have to have a lot cleaner systems. So they've gotten a lot better over time as I've grown my business and grown my team.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes sense as well, and I am sure a lot of the listeners can definitely see themselves in that. I see. One of the biggest things I see a lot is people, they know they have to build processes, and often what happens is they find some time, they sit down, they build the processes, and then no one looks at them for 2 years. And then all the processes that was built are suddenly out of date and no longer very relevant in the business, right? So what's your system then for keeping processes and workflow up to date? Like, how do you, again, think about that?
We build our processes and our process documentation into our project management systems. So as an example, we use Trello because I really like the Kanban style thing for keeping track of projects. You can do it with any system you want, though. We just happen to prefer Trello because it's where we're at. But what we do is, I mentioned earlier, you have systems, workflows, processes, and steps. So we consider a Trello board, a particular Trello board is one workflow, right? And it has a start and it has an end, and it has a very defined beginning and a very defined end. So we use a complicated version of Trello's to-do, doing, done methodology, where a new task will come in. It'll come on the first list of a Trello board. The first step of the workflow is, hey, we got a new item that you're following along your workflow. So in the case of a podcast episode, like when we're doing the post-production, it comes in, hey, a new episode is recorded, and it drops in on that Trello board for post-production as a to-do. And it goes through all the different processes that go all the way across until it's published, right? And so it goes from to do, raw episode to published, finished episode, and all the little to-dos in the middle are the processes that happen. And so what we do is in each one of the processes in the workflow, right? So if it's editing the podcast for the final audio, for instance, is one of our processes, it'll have a checklist. And the checklist will have, we need to do X, Y, and Z to the audio in order for it to be completed. And so each one of those items in the checklist, we will have the checklist will actually have, this is the thing that needs to get done. And then it'll have a link to our process document for that item, right? That actually walks through the individual steps to accomplish that thing. And so it does a number of things for us. One, when someone gets dropped into that list, like if we hire a new staff member, we can actually put them right into our project management system, and the project management system will train them through the stuff they need to do. And it also is out of the way for someone who has done the process a number of times already and already has it like second nature. But the documentation is there as a backup if they need it. It's right in the checklist of the project management system. So they're sort of tied together like that. And then it's really easy if when someone is looking at it, if one of the processes changed, that it's really obvious in the checklist, right? That this is different now. So we just go in and update those processes. So by keeping them married together, where the project management and the documentation for the actual processes the project management is tracking, by keeping them together like that, it helps you train your employees and bring people up to speed really quickly. And it also keeps your process documentation up to date because it's obvious when something isn't working anymore.
And that makes a lot of sense as well. I am also a fellow absolute Trello fanatic. I love using Trello the way you just described. The one time where I feel it can be a little bit challenging is if you have multiple processes happening at the same time, right? So it works great as a workflow where you kind of have one step and one person pushes us to the next. There's definitely also some workarounds to try and have multiple steps and so on, but it definitely works best when it's kind of one step at a time process, right? But yeah, I'm a huge fan as well.
It doesn't do the while this also that style systems as well as it first this then that kind of systems.
So, but it's good. I'm a big fan, and again, I love simplicity, right? I think initially in one of my businesses, we had a lot of customers come in, and we gave them access because they were basically having virtual assistant work for them and so on, and we gave them access. And initially, we were trying Asana out and so on, and it was just like Trello was just so simple for everyone. The same, like you literally spend 5 minutes training an employee in how to use Trello, right? Like it's that simple and it's that intuitive, which I really love about it.
It's like the task comes in as a card, you just move the task. That's all you got to do. We do a couple other things too with Trello for people who use it. We put sticky cards at the top of every one of our lists. And the sticky card at the top of the list has a label on it that says sticky. And we got a couple of rules that keep those cards at the top of the lists. And when you pop that card open, it's got a description of the process. And so the description on that top card is like, hey, if the process is edit the audio, right? Like we've been talking about, then it has a full description of the process. And then it also has a full description of any automations that are applied to that particular list, right? So if Zapier is affecting anything on that list, or if, the Trello's Butler rules are affecting anything on the list, it's all detailed on there. So someone can look at the list and know, what's human versus robot capital is happening on this list and what the expected desired outcome is. And we also put any templates on that sticky card. So, right. So if there's a checklist that needs to happen, we'll put a master checklist in that sticky card with any of the assignments for who should be doing what on that list. And so you have one place that you can update that stuff, and anytime a card moves over there, the checklists are copied from that sticky list onto the task card that's moved in. So it makes managing the Trello board really simple.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. And yeah, you have been managing a remote team for quite a while. How big is your team now?
We have a small team. We've just got 4 people, so it's myself and 3 individuals. I've got a multimedia and my chief of staff, and then we have a data management individual, and then a writer full time who does writing and transcription for us for our podcasting agency. And we're looking to grow that significantly over the next couple of years as we increase our number of shows that we're managing on Pushbutton Podcasts. But yeah, that's where we're at right now. And that's we've been doing that for years. So
excellent. So I mean, you've been remote since day one, I take it, right? Yeah. So what's been your experience with all this remote work? I mean, obviously lots and lots of people have joined the bandwagon now with COVID, but what's been your experience in terms of the pros and cons and so on with having staff members remote?
So the biggest pro, I think, for me is that, at least like the company culture I've been trying to build, is that we're very focused on outcomes and getting the work done, and not focused on how many hours people are working. And it's really easy to do that when you're not all sitting around next to each other in the office, to focus more on the outcome of the work than being busy. So that, I think, is one of the big benefits. The other benefit is you have access to a very wide pool of talent. When you're hiring locally, you're hiring from the pool of talent that's available, within driving distance of your local area. And I work with an e-commerce company that we've been trying to hire for, and it's been a big struggle because we've been trying to hire people locally. And the pool of talent is just very small, and it's very difficult to find the right person to fit for the job. When we hire remotely, I don't know, there's just, because you have such a vast pool you're pulling from, it's much easier to find the right person. Like, you have to filter through a bit more people. But you have so many people that will come in and show that it's easier to find the right one, I think. So those are some of the pros. Cons is it's a little more difficult to get to know each other and to really build a culture. So you have to try a lot harder to build a company culture, and you have to be more intentional about it. And so we do a couple of things, like we do weekly chat meetings, and we have things like our group communication, where we have like weekend chats, and we keep up with each other on birthdays and other things that are going on. So you just have to be more intentional about creating a community with your team.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And I think, for me, at least, culture and generally having a set focus on that, and actually really pushing that is so important when you're remote, right? Because, again, like, for every human being on planet Earth, sometimes, you might be supposed to be working, but everyone have this thing called discipline, and, some have a little bit, some have a lot more, but the best thing you can do for yourself and your business is really build, a culture where there is a good work discipline. And it doesn't necessarily mean to work 100 hours, but it's, you want your team and you want your people to have a discipline that makes sure things get done, right?
Yeah.
Because if you keep failing on deliverables, then remote culture very quickly dies, right?
Yep.
So excellent. Well, that's good to hear. And what's sort of where I should say, have you primarily been hiring? So are you primarily hiring in the US, or have you been hiring anywhere?
We hire in the Philippines mostly.
Oh, okay, excellent.
Because I got a lot of experience there. They speak English, generally as a first language, so they learn English in primary school all the way through to college. And there's not a lot of cultural difference with the way language is used. I found in a few other, when you hire from some of the other cultures, like India, for instance, nothing wrong with Indian workers, but there's just a different way. Like when we say yes in English, a lot of times it means means yes, like yes, we're going to do that. And in India, yes generally means I understood you or I heard you. And so you have to be aware of those differences when you're hiring in different cultures. And I've just found the Philippine culture is, I have to think less about it when I hire from the Philippines than I do in other places, because it's very similar to the American culture in terms of like how we speak and how we interact with each other.
That makes a lot of sense. So I have a big outsourcing company in the Philippines as well. So I love the Filipinos as well. They're extremely nice people on top of it all. So
yeah,
it's good. Excellent, Richard. So remote teams. I mean, I think it's one of those things that I have this expectation that even when COVID finished, so many businesses suddenly realize, oh, we can do this thing remotely. We don't need a 20, 30, 50 grand office to have all these people in. We can either have a smaller office or perhaps not have an office at all. So I really have an expectation that lots and lots of business owners are going to change their office sort of behavior. And I definitely will not be investing my money in
large office buildings in New York anymore.
Large office buildings and sort of that kind of real estate, right? Like that's I think they will face a tough time, because for many years, I mean, I've been in the outsourcing game since 2007 or so, and I mean it used to be like a struggle to try and explain to people that you can hire more cost-effective labor on the other side of the planet, and that kind of stuff. And it used to be like very exploratory and first movers type of thing, whereas I mean today it's everyone knows what it is, right? Like when you talk outsourcing or when you're talking about people halfway around the world, like most people have been in a scenario where they've had a colleague sitting far away, right? And like people are always like, yeah, but it's so far away. And I'm like, if you have an office in Houston and you have an office in, I don't know, Maine or something, like in the end of the day, like it's the same thing, right? Like it doesn't matter the distance. I mean, obviously, again, as you mentioned, it's harder to visit, it's harder to see each other frequently, but from a work perspective, right, it doesn't matter where in the world you are. I've now,
especially with the technology nowadays, like you and I can sit here and talk, and I'm in Maine and I don't know where you are right now, but we're not next to each other, that's for sure.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? I mean, I've enjoyed it immensely, and I've definitely hired people on every continent. I definitely haven't hired people in every country yet, but I love the ability to look at different places, look at different people, and it's a lot of the time, particularly from American, there used to be this sort of, but if you're not hiring Americans, you're really, you're stealing American workforce and so on. But again, that's primarily for people who doesn't understand business as well, because reality is if you're paying someone 10, 15 bucks an hour to do things that is not worth getting done at that salary, then you probably won't. And that means that there's a lot of stuff that can actually grow a company that is just not happening because it's not valuable to do. But when you have lower workforce, and one of the things I see it happen with a lot is like lead generation as an example, right? Whereas a company, it doesn't make financial sense to pay 15 bucks an hour to have someone to do lead generation I mean, I'm sure there's ways to do, but in a lot of lead generation ways, that might not make sense. But if you can do it at $5 an hour or whatever, then suddenly it makes business sense to do it, right? And what happens is that when that happens, effectively what happens is more jobs also get created in the US, right? Because when you suddenly sell more products, you sell more services, more stuff are being bought and sold. What that means is that it creates jobs back in the US as well. All right. So I think a lot of the time that's really how I look at business. And
the rising tide raises all ships.
Yeah, exactly. And reality is, if you're doing a job just pressing a button right now, like you might complain, you might say, oh, I should be 15 bucks an hour instead of 10 bucks an hour. And that's great. But the whole thing is, if it's not valuable for the company to do it, or if the company can't sell their products because it's not competitive to do it, then in the end of the day, it won't happen, right? Like, it's not because people don't want to pay a fair wage. That's not the point. The whole point is that all business, they need to be able to sell their products. And, if you cost twice what the competitors cost, then in the end of the day, you don't have a better product per se, then, you're not going to be in business very long.
And then the jobs go away.
And then the jobs go away. And that's what that's honestly what you see happen a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I think when people see the opportunities and when people start moving into it, many people work not just online, right? But there's more and more people who work in businesses that are primarily driven online and that are seeing some of these opportunities and seeing some of this growth that can happen, right? And I think it's a big eye opener, and I really expect, like, after COVID, I expect huge changes in the business world in general.
Yeah, it's opportunities like we've never seen before, because the world has experienced a paradigm shift in how business is done and how work is done. And I think we're going to see probably explosive growth over the next 10 years like we've not ever seen before. That's my own gut feeling.
I expect the same thing. Obviously, there might be a little financial impact as well, but there's so many. Like, one of the big things is that when you have a big office, when you have a lot of set expenses, something like COVID is choking you, right? Because if you're paying 50 grand to an office that you can't touch, that's a lot of expenses. And if your income either decimates completely or goes down, I had a couple of friends in the travel industry that had a big team, and they had to close down because no one's traveling abroad and there's no money to be made, or not a lot of money to be made in it, right? And in the end of the day, like, they had no options. And it's great the government is trying to help and stuff, but in the end of the day, like, there's big impacts to real businesses, right? And like, most of these people, again, have switched to other models, right? Like, they've switched online. They're looking at other opportunities. They're looking to what they can do without that big overhead, right? And I expect to see a lot more of that.
Absolutely, me too.
So, Richard, you've built this business from the ground up by yourself. So, any particular tips in terms of, like, resources or the likes that you recommend to other business owners that they could benefit from big time?
So as far as building a business from the ground up, it's less of a resource and more of a mindset, especially if you're earlier in your entrepreneurial career. And it's take the risk. And what I mean by that is, like, my favorite metaphor is, you can learn to fly on the way down, right? Jump off the cliff, learn to build a parachute while you're going. Because if you don't take the risk, you're going to miss the opportunities. And most of my biggest wins and my biggest growth in business has always been when I've stepped out and done the thing I was afraid to do. And most of my biggest losses have been when I've said, no, I'm going to hold off. I'm not going to do that. And so it's a mindset that when you take the risks, right? And I don't mean take, like, stupid risks. Don't, like, make it, destroy your life or destroy your business with it. But the ones that are palatable, take the risks and move forward. And what you'll find is that as you take more risks, your risk tolerance will grow and you'll get bigger and bigger opportunities, because your tolerance for risk grows as you take more risks. Does that make sense? That's sort of like, that's a mentality I've seen in my business has grown a lot because I have steadily increased my risk tolerance and taken the risks that have pushed my business forward a lot.
Yeah, I don't think it's just that, right? I think it's this natural human behavior where, like, we're more afraid to lose $100 than we are to not make $100, right? And I think that's often what's holding people back when it comes to risk. Like, it's kind of like, do you want to risk losing $1,000 or do you want to have the potential opportunity of making $1 million? And a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't want to risk losing $1,000," right? So exactly as you say, it's very much around mindset, and I think it's not just practicing it, but it's really being very, very conscious of the fact of just how we as human beings work, particularly in terms of risk, right?
Yeah, and you have to be really conscious of that idea that you're, like, looking at I could lose this thing, but I have the potential gain for that thing, and the potential gain in your head will almost never outweigh the potential loss. So what you have to look at least what I do with myself, is like, okay, so I'm going to take this risk and assume I'm going to lose. How do I build back from that loss position? And when I do that in my head, then I look at, oh, it's not that bad, right? It's not that bad. I know I could come back from that loss. Here's how I would overcome that loss. And I go through it. And it almost never ends up in that worst case scenario in your head, right? It also almost never ends up in the best case scenario in your head either, but it ends up somewhere in the middle, which is better than you would have been if you did nothing. And so that's just a mindset trick that I use for
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Fantastic, Richard. Well, thank you very, very much for joining me on this episode. If people are eager to get hold of you, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, you can reach out to us at pushbuttonpodcasts.com. We offer demos. We got our contact stuff on there. Anything you want to take a look at. It's a great place to find us there. We also run a podcast called The Hero Show that you can check out on iTunes and other places.
Awesome. Yeah, I've definitely enjoyed podcasting a lot, and I think it's one of those things that actually help you. I mean, I've done a lot of public speaking as well, but I know many podcasters who have benefited from starting a podcast, just learning to communicate, learning to network. I mean, it's an awesome way to meet a lot of great people, right?
Yeah.
Getting a lot of fantastic guests like yourself. So
yeah. It's also I call it the biggest networking hack in the world, because when you have a podcast and you ask someone who you would like to meet, like, someone who's on your Dream 100 list or something, like, hey, I'd like to chat. Would you like to come visit, on our podcast? Far more likely to get a yes than, hey, can I pick your brain for a minute? Or can I, whatever you get. It's really easy to open doors with a podcast.
100% agree. And I love using it like that as well. Like, I think podcasting in general is, it's great at so many levels, right? I'm also very much into SEO, the world of SEO and so on. And it's also great for building lots of links and all this good stuff. So, like, I typically do about 100 podcasts a year on other people's podcasts, right? And it's even on small, tiny shows, like you build relationship with new people, and it's not every single person that turns up to and changes your life. But the whole point is, if you don't do it, then nothing changes, kind of thing, right? So
it's opening yourself up to those black swan style events, right? Where you do 100 shows and one relationship changes the whole paradigm, right? And that's kind of stuff that happens when you actually get out and do things, right? It's back to that risk taking stuff, right? You take the risks, do the thing.
Excellent. Richard, thank you very, very much for joining me today. It was awesome having you on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. And to the audience, we'll be back again next week. Thank you very much for hanging on this far. I hope you had a good time.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.